"You're heartless," my daughter Ophelia screamed as she stormed out of my mother's house in Willowmere Gardens, tears streaming down her face. 2 days I spent making that cake perfect for Grandma Celeste's 75th birthday, and you fed it to Winston like it was dog food. The entire family gathering froze, my sister Magnolia clutching her coffee cup, my brother-in-law Sterling staring in shock, even my 10-year-old nephew Jasper stopping mid-bite of his cucumber sandwich. They all turned to look at me, standing there with my mother's massive St. Bernard happily licking raspberry buttercream off his enormous whiskers. I just smiled calmly and said, "You're absolutely right. I did give her cake to the dog." What they didn't know was that destroying my daughter's beautiful homemade cake wasn't cruelty, it was protection. The truth? I had been shielding Ophelia from a devastating family secret for months, and she was about to discover exactly what happens when that shield gets removed. Let me tell you something about being a 30-year-old single mother caught between generations in a family that specializes in beautiful facades hiding ugly truths. You become the translator, the mediator, the one who keeps everyone's feelings intact while managing the chaos that bubbles beneath every family gathering like a pot about to boil over. You smile through the passive-aggressive comments, navigate the decades-old resentments, and somehow make sure your child believes they're part of a loving, functional family, even when you know the foundation is built on lies, manipulation, and secrets so dark they could destroy everything. I'm Cordelia, though everyone calls me Delia, and I've been playing this impossible balancing act since my divorce 3 years ago from my ex-husband Nathaniel. When he moved to Portland for his architecture firm promotion, I made the decision to stay here in Ravensbrook so Ophelia could be close to her grandmother. It seemed like the right choice at the time. Ophelia absolutely adored my mother Celeste, and Mom had been struggling with what appeared to be loneliness since Dad passed away 5 years earlier from what we were told was a sudden heart attack. What I didn't anticipate was becoming the full-time manager of a relationship that was far more complicated and dangerous than the sweet grandmother-granddaughter bond everyone else saw on the surface. What I couldn't have predicted was that I'd become the keeper of secrets so twisted, so potentially destructive, that I'd spend every family gathering holding my breath, waiting for the moment when everything would explode. But let me start at the beginning, because you need to understand how I became the person standing in my mother's pristine kitchen in her Tudor-style house on Rosemary Lane, watching my daughter's culinary masterpiece disappear into the slobbering mouth of a 150-pound dog, while my family stared at me like I'd just committed the cruelest act imaginable. 3 years ago, when Nathaniel and I were going through our divorce proceedings at the law offices of Harrison and Associates on Maple Street, I thought my biggest challenge would be co-parenting with an ex-husband living 400 miles away. I was working as a marketing coordinator at Evergreen Digital Solutions, making decent money, but not enough to maintain the lifestyle Ophelia was used to. The house in Brookfield Heights that we'd bought during happier times suddenly felt enormous and expensive, with its mortgage payments and maintenance costs stretching my budget to the breaking point. That's when my mother swooped in with what seemed like a perfect solution. "Darling," she said over tea at the Ivory Rose Cafe on Chestnut Avenue, her manicured hands wrapped around a delicate porcelain cup, "you're struggling unnecessarily. Why don't you and Ophelia move back home? The house has plenty of space, and it would be wonderful to have my granddaughter close by. Besides, I could use the company." Her house was indeed massive, a 5-bedroom Tudor revival with manicured gardens and a 3-car garage, situated in the most prestigious neighborhood in Ravensbrook. My childhood bedroom was still exactly as I left it when I went to college at Westfield University, complete with my old posters and the desk where I'd written countless essays. The guest suite on the second floor would be perfect for Ophelia, with its own bathroom and sitting area overlooking the rose garden. The financial relief would be immediate and substantial. No more mortgage payments, no more worry about utility bills or property taxes. I could focus on advancing my career and providing stability for Ophelia during what was already a traumatic transition. My mother seemed genuinely excited about the prospect of daily life with her granddaughter, talking about baking lessons and garden projects and all the grandmother-granddaughter activities she'd been missing. Looking back now, I should have questioned why a woman who had spent most of my childhood at charity luncheons and bridge games suddenly wanted to be so involved in day-to-day family life. I should have wondered why someone who had always preferred adult company was suddenly enthusiastic about having a child in the house again. I should have paid attention to the way she asked detailed questions about Ophelia's schedule, her friendships, her school activities, questions that seemed excessive even for a doting grandmother. But I was exhausted, financially stressed, and desperately wanting to believe that this living arrangement could provide the stability and support that Ophelia needed during such a difficult time. I was 27 years old, recently divorced, and trying to rebuild my life while making sure my daughter felt loved and secure despite her world having been turned upside down. The first few months were genuinely wonderful. Celeste transformed into what seemed like the perfect grandmother, patient, attentive, and endlessly creative. She taught Ophelia how to bake elaborate French pastries in the kitchen with its professional-grade appliances and marble countertops. She helped with homework at the antique secretary desk in the library, surrounded by first-edition novels and family photos in silver frames. She took Ophelia shopping at Bellecourt Boutique for clothes that were far nicer than anything I could have afforded, always insisting it was her pleasure to spoil her granddaughter. Ophelia blossomed under the attention. After months of seeing her parents argue and eventually separate, after the confusion and sadness of Daddy moving far away, she finally seemed happy and secure again. She would run home from Ravensbrook Elementary School, excited to tell Grandma Celeste about her day, to show off her art projects, to help plan elaborate dinner menus that we'd cook together in the evenings. Our family dinners became productions worthy of a cooking show. Every night at precisely 6 p.m., we'd gather in the formal dining room with its crystal chandelier and hand-painted china. Celeste would light candles and arrange flowers from her garden, creating an atmosphere of elegance and warmth that made even simple Tuesday evening meals feel special. Ophelia would carefully set the table with the good silverware, proud to be trusted with the family heirlooms. A proper family dinner is about more than food, Celeste would say, adjusting Ophelia's posture or gently correcting her table manners. It's about creating memories, about maintaining standards, about showing respect for the people we love. Those early months, I felt like I was watching Ophelia develop confidence and sophistication that would serve her well in life. She learned to cook complex dishes, to arrange flowers, to set a proper table, to make conversation with adults. She was developing skills and experiences that most kids her age never had access to. But gradually, so slowly that I almost didn't notice, the lessons became more intense, more specific, more controlling. It started with comments about Ophelia's friends. "That little Madison girl seems rather rough around the edges," Celeste would say after Ophelia mentioned a classmate. "Perhaps you should encourage Ophelia to spend time with more suitable companions." When I asked what she meant by suitable, she'd wave her hand dismissively and say she just wanted Ophelia to have friends who would be good influences, who came from families with similar values. Then there were observations about Ophelia's interests and activities. When Ophelia wanted to join the school's soccer team, Celeste suggested piano lessons might be more appropriate for a young lady. When Ophelia expressed interest in a summer camp at the community college, Celeste countered with an offer to enroll her in a summer etiquette program at the Ravensbrook Country Club. "I just want her to have every advantage," she'd tell me when I gently questioned these redirections. "The world can be harsh for women, Delia. The more refined and polished she is, the better she'll be able to navigate society." I told myself she was just old-fashioned, that her intentions were good even if her methods felt outdated. My own childhood had been similar: piano lessons, proper manners, emphasis on appearance and social graces. I'd turned out fine, hadn't I? Maybe Celeste was just trying to give Ophelia the same advantages she had given me.
But then I started noticing other things. The way Celeste would ask detailed questions about my work schedule, my social plans, my whereabouts throughout the day. She'd phrase it as concern. I just want to make sure you're not overworking yourself, darling. But there was an intensity to her curiosity that felt invasive. She began offering to handle more and more of Ophelia's activities and appointments. You're so busy at work, she'd say. Let me take Ophelia to her doctor's appointment. Let me handle the parent-teacher conference. Let me sign her up for summer activities. What seemed like helpful grandmother support gradually began to feel like she was inserting herself into every aspect of Ophelia's life. The turning point came 8 months after we'd moved in, on a Tuesday evening when I came home from a particularly long day at Evergreen Digital. I'd been working on a major campaign for Holloway & Partners Construction, and the project had required multiple revisions and client meetings that stretched well into the evening. I was exhausted and looking forward to a quiet dinner with my family. I walked into the house through the side entrance that led directly into the kitchen, expecting to find the usual scene of Celeste and Ophelia working together on dinner preparation. Instead, I found Ophelia sitting alone at the kitchen island, tears streaming down her face, while Celeste stood at the stove with her back rigid with anger. "What's wrong?" I asked immediately, dropping my purse and rushing to Ophelia's side. "Nothing's wrong," Celeste said without turning around, her voice tight with controlled fury. "What happened, sweetie?" I asked, smoothing Ophelia's hair and trying to catch her eyes. I forgot to put my lunch dishes in the dishwasher after school, and I left my backpack on the front hall table instead of taking it upstairs."
I looked from my crying daughter to my mother's rigid posture. That's it? She forgot to clean up after herself? "It's not about the dishes, Delia," Celeste said, finally turning around. Her face was composed, but her eyes were cold in a way I'd never seen before. "It's about respect. It's about maintaining standards. It's about understanding that when we live in a beautiful home with nice things, we have responsibilities." "She's 9 years old, Mom," I said carefully. "Kids forget things sometimes." And that's exactly the kind of permissive attitude that creates entitled, disrespectful children, Celeste replied sharply. "I've seen what happens to families who don't maintain proper standards. I won't allow Ophelia to become one of those children who thinks the world revolves around her convenience." The punishment, I learned, was that Ophelia would eat dinner alone in the kitchen while Celeste and I ate in the dining room. She would spend the evening doing extra chores instead of the usual after-dinner activities. She would go to bed an hour early with no story time or conversation. "Don't you think that's a bit extreme?" I asked quietly, trying not to undermine Celeste in front of Ophelia, but feeling deeply uncomfortable with the harshness of the response. "If you think it's too extreme, perhaps you should consider whether this living arrangement is working for your family," Celeste said, her voice so calm and controlled, it was terrifying. That night, after Ophelia was asleep, I sat in my childhood bedroom trying to process what had happened. Was I being too permissive? Was Celeste right that children needed stricter boundaries and higher standards? Or was my instinct correct that her response had been disproportionate and cruel? I decided to give it more time, to observe more carefully, to make sure I wasn't overreacting to one isolated incident. But it wasn't isolated. Over the following weeks, I began to see a pattern of control and manipulation that chilled me to the bone. Celeste's standards weren't about creating a well-mannered child. They were about creating a child who was completely compliant, completely dependent, completely shaped according to Celeste's vision of perfection. And slowly, I began to realize that my daughter wasn't the only one being controlled and manipulated. I was too. That's when I started to understand that the beautiful family life I thought we were building was actually a carefully constructed trap, and the grandmother who seemed so devoted to Ophelia's well-being was actually someone far more dangerous than I could have imagined. After Magnolia, Esperanza Thornfield left Blackthorn Memorial Hospital with an ancient root system growing inside her body,
I thought I had witnessed the most impossible case of my medical career. A 176-year-old botanical network connected to a murdered healer named Serafina Moss had somehow found its genetic descendant and created a living bridge between past and present. But Magnolia had warned me. There were 3 more women coming, 3 more bloodlines connected to the spirits buried beneath Operating Room 7. What I was about to experience over the next 5 months would make her impossible root system seem like a minor medical anomaly. By the time the 4th and final case arrived in March of 2024, I would understand that OR7 had never just been an operating room. It had been a resurrection chamber, waiting over a century and a half for the right moment to bring 4 murdered healers back to life through their living descendants. This is the story of how the dead reclaimed their healing knowledge, how my entire surgical team was transformed by forces beyond medical understanding, and why I could never practice surgery again. What you're about to hear challenged not just my beliefs about medicine, but my understanding of life, death, and the very nature of reality itself. 3 weeks after Magnolia's discharge, Cordelia Nightshade arrived at Blackthorn Memorial on November 7, 2023. She was found unconscious in Bonaventure Cemetery at exactly midnight, lying across the grave of Evangeline, herb woman, died 1852. The groundskeeper who discovered her said she'd been there for hours, apparently gardening in the dark, planting flowers that glowed with their own soft light. Like Magnolia, she was bleeding internally from no apparent cause, and like Magnolia, she had those same translucent pale green eyes that seemed to look straight through you into something beyond the visible world. But Cordelia was different in disturbing ways that became apparent the moment she entered OR7. The temperature didn't just drop, it plummeted to 48 degrees in a matter of minutes. Frost began forming on the surgical instruments. The fluorescent lights began flickering in a pattern that seemed almost like Morse code. And most unsettling of all, every electronic device in the room began picking up what sounded like whispered conversations in languages none of us recognized. "Dr. Ravencroft," Ophelia whispered as we prepped Cordelia for surgery, her voice trembling. "Look at her hair." I looked closer and felt my blood freeze. Tiny flowers were growing from Cordelia's scalp, not placed there, but actually sprouting from her hair follicles. Delicate white blossoms that pulsed with bioluminescence, their petals opening and closing in rhythm with her heartbeat. "How long has she been unconscious?" I asked the paramedic who had brought her in. "That's the thing, Doc. She wasn't unconscious. When we found her, she was gardening. At midnight. In November. In Georgia. She was planting flowers on a 170-year-old grave with her bare hands, and the flowers were growing as she planted them. She only lost consciousness when we tried to move her from the grave."
The paramedic paused, looking disturbed by his own report. "And Doc, the flowers she planted, they're not native to this region. Hell, some of them aren't native to this continent. But they're thriving in November, in Georgia, in soil that's been untouched for over a century." When I opened Cordelia Nightshade's abdomen, I found something that made Magnolia's root system look almost normal by comparison. Her internal organs were host to an entire ecosystem of insects, butterflies, beetles, moths, and species I couldn't identify. But these weren't just any insects. They were all extinct species, some that had been gone for over a century, all of them very much alive and thriving inside her body. "My God," Dr. Cross breathed from his position at the anesthesia station. "Those are Xerces blue butterflies. They've been extinct since 1943. I wrote my doctoral thesis on extinct Lepidoptera." The insects had created a complex, symbiotic relationship with Cordelia's organs that defied everything I knew about biology. Butterflies with wings like stained glass pollinated what appeared to be flowering tissue growing along her intestinal walls. Beetles with iridescent carapaces processed waste materials. somehow purifying her blood more efficiently than her kidneys could manage alone. Moths with wingspan patterns that seemed to shift and change clustered around her heart, their wing beats perfectly synchronized with her cardiac rhythm. As impossible as it seemed, the extinct insect colony was actually enhancing her physiological functions. Her blood oxygen levels were higher than humanly possible. Her organ function was operating at efficiency rates that should have been impossible. But like Magnolia's roots, they were bleeding, not blood, but a golden nectar that smelled like honeysuckle and jasmine and carried an otherworldly luminescence that made the entire surgical field glow. "Ophelia, are you documenting this?" I asked, my voice barely steady. "I'm trying, Dr. Ravencroft, but the cameras keep malfunctioning. Every time I focus on the insects, the image distorts like they're existing in a different spectrum of light than everything else." Under deep general anesthesia, with no measurable brain activity that should have allowed consciousness, Cordelia began speaking in what sounded like multiple voices, different accents, different speech patterns, different ages, as if several people were using her vocal cords simultaneously. "Dr. Ravencroft," came the first voice, cultured and refined with an antebellum Southern accent. "I am Evangeline Whitmore. They burned me in 1852 for healing children with my butterfly medicine. They said I was consorting with demons, but I was only listening to what the insects could teach about the healing properties of pollen and nectar." A second voice, rougher and older, with an Irish brogue. "I am Sister Mary Catherine O'Brien. The church accused me of witchcraft because I could communicate with God's smallest creatures. They said my ability to heal with insect medicine was devil's work. They buried me alive in 1859 for saving children that their doctors couldn't help." A third voice, younger and frightened, with a mountain accent. "I'm Rebecca Moonchild from the North Georgia mountains. I was only 16 when they drowned me in the Chattahoochee River for keeping extinct butterflies alive through the winter of 1861. I could make them hibernate in healing states, preserving their medicine for when it was needed most." "3 women," I whispered, looking at the impossible ecosystem thriving inside Cordelia's body. 3 women whose knowledge of insect medicine died with them. Until now. The butterflies and beetles have been waiting in the space between life and death, preserving their healing properties for the right host. I am their descendant through 3 different bloodlines, the convergence they've been waiting for. I watched as a particularly large butterfly, with wings that seemed to contain entire galaxies, landed on my surgical glove. Instead of being alarmed, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace and knowledge flowing through me. "What do you need from me?" I asked. "Let us live," all 4 voices said in unison, creating harmonies that made the surgical instruments ring like wind chimes. "Let the medicine continue. Let the healing insects return to the world they were taken from." On January 15, 2024, Luna Shadowmere was brought to our emergency department in a condition that defied not just medical explanation, but the laws of physics themselves. She had been found in her downtown Savannah apartment, which had somehow become completely frozen despite the heating system working perfectly and the outside temperature being a mild 65 degrees. The temperature inside her apartment was minus 10 degrees Fahrenheit, but she was alive, conscious, and speaking normally. Her body temperature registered as 62 degrees Fahrenheit, a reading that should have meant death hours earlier. "She keeps saying she needs to get to the cold room," Dr. Ashworth told me as we rushed Luna to OR7. "She specifically asked for the operating room that remembers winter. How could she possibly know about the temperature anomalies in OR7? When Luna entered OR7, something unprecedented happened. The room's mysterious temperature drops, which we'd grown accustomed to over the months since Magnolia's case, intensified until frost covered every surface. Our breath came out in visible clouds,
and the surgical instruments became so cold they burned to touch with bare skin. But Luna seemed comfortable, even relieved by the Arctic conditions. "Finally," she said as we lifted her onto the operating table, her voice creating visible puffs of vapor. "I've been burning up for weeks. The cold is the only thing that feels natural anymore."
And if you're ever in Savannah, Georgia, and you drive past Blackthorn Memorial Hospital, look for the East Wing, where impossible flowers bloom year-round and butterflies that science says are extinct create living rainbows in the windows. The sanctuary of ancient medicine still operates there, still healing the unhealable, still proving that some knowledge is too important to stay buried forever. Thank you for listening to my story. May you never need the kind of healing that brought 4 ancient women back from the dead, but may you always remember that healing is sacred work that connects us all to something far greater than we understand. Late at night, when I'm alone in the clinic, I can still feel the presence of Seraphina, Evangeline, Isadora, and Mortality, the 4 ancient healers whose return to life changed everything I thought I knew about medicine. They're still there, still healing, still teaching anyone willing to learn that the boundary between life and death is far more permeable than modern medicine acknowledges. 6 months after leaving Savannah, I still receive updates from my former colleagues at Blackthorn Memorial Hospital. The sanctuary of ancient medicine has become more than just a treatment center. It's become a new model for healthcare that's spreading to other hospitals around the world. Dr. Ashworth writes to tell me about patients whose terminal diagnoses have been completely reversed through treatments that combine modern medical technology with healing techniques that were preserved for centuries in supernatural form. Ophelia sends photos of the extinct butterflies that have established permanent colonies throughout the hospital, producing medicines that pharmaceutical companies are desperately trying to replicate. Dr. Cross reports that his anesthesia techniques now allow patients to access healing states that resolve trauma and illness at levels deeper than physical symptoms. But the most remarkable development is that the phenomenon isn't confined to Blackthorn Memorial Hospital anymore. Hospitals built on burial grounds around the world are reporting similar events. Ancient healers are returning through living descendants, bringing medical knowledge that was lost when traditional healing practices were suppressed by fear, ignorance, and religious persecution. The boundary between conventional medicine and spiritual healing is dissolving as more doctors encounter impossible cases that force them to expand their understanding of what healing can be. I gave up surgery not because what I witnessed was terrifying, but because it was beautiful, and I could no longer accept the limitations of medicine that ignores the spiritual dimensions of healing. But in my small clinic in Montana, I've discovered that the ancient healing wisdom doesn't require supernatural phenomena to be effective. The knowledge that infected OR7, that transformed my surgical team, that brought 4 murdered healers back from the dead, it lives in subtle ways in every interaction with patients who need more than just physical treatment. When I hold the hand of an elderly man whose wife is dying, I can feel the healing that comes from human connection. When I listen to a young mother's concerns about her child's chronic illness, I can sense the family patterns that contribute to physical symptoms. When I treat a rancher's back injury, I can see how his relationship with the land affects his body's ability to heal. The 4 cases that changed my life taught me that some operating rooms remember every patient, every procedure, and every healer who has ever worked within their walls. But more than that, they taught me that healing is always a collaboration between the scientific and the spiritual, between the knowledge we can measure and the wisdom that exists beyond measurement. I gave up surgery not because the ancient healing wisdom was too powerful, but because it was beautiful, and I could no longer accept the limitations of medicine that ignores the spiritual dimensions of healing.
But in my small clinic in Montana, surrounded by mountains that have witnessed healing practices far older than modern medicine, I continue the work that began in OR7, not through supernatural surgery guided by ancient spirits, but through the quieter miracle of treating each patient as a whole person whose physical symptoms are connected to spiritual, emotional, and energetic realities that textbooks don't teach, but healers must learn to see. The four ancient healers, Seraphina Moss, Evangeline Whitmore, Isadora Frostborn, and Mortality Blackthorn, continue their work through the living. Their healing knowledge spreads through every doctor who witnesses impossible recoveries, every nurse who feels guided by intuitive wisdom, and every patient who experiences healing that goes beyond what medical science can explain. They didn't return from the dead just to reclaim their own healing practices. They returned to remind all of us that healing is sacred work that requires both scientific knowledge and spiritual wisdom, both technological skill and human compassion, both evidence-based treatment and faith and possibilities that exist beyond current understanding. The dead don't always stay dead. And sometimes that's exactly what the living need to remember about the true nature of healing. In my small clinic in Montana, surrounded by mountains that have witnessed healing practices far older than modern medicine, I continued the work that began in OR7, not through supernatural surgery guided by ancient spirits, but through the quieter miracle of treating each patient as a whole person whose physical symptoms are connected to spiritual, emotional, and energetic realities that textbooks don't teach, but healers must learn to see. The ancient healers live on, not just in the supernatural sanctuary they created at Blackthorn Memorial Hospital, but in every act of healing that honors the sacred connection between body, mind, spirit, and the natural world that sustains all life. And sometimes,